Hello, and welcome to another lecture video on developmental psychology. For this lecture video, we would be discussing about a new developmental stage, which is about emerging adulthood. Now, emerging adulthood is usually defined as approximately ages 20 to 40, and this developmental stage is characterized by a can-do period. Many people at this age are on their own for the first time, maybe leaving the house for the first time, being financially independent for the first time, and so many other new things that they enjoy. This period also is an exploratory period to find one's role in the society. In this lecture video, we would be looking at different physical functioning, cognitive functioning, and psychosocial development among emerging adults. Before we proceed to the different domains of development, one may think, when does a person become an adult? Now, what could be defining characteristics of an adult? Maybe some of you would say that it has something to do with sexual maturity. And if you recall, sexual maturity arrives during adolescence, during puberty, wherein an individual is now capable of producing sex cells, which is essential for a new life. Or maybe some of you would say it has something to do with cognitive maturity. And if you try to recall your previous lessons, the rewiring of the brain is still undergoing even until the age of 25. And so cognitive maturity during the early stage of young adulthood may not be fully crystallized or fully developed yet. Maybe for you, adulthood has something to do with your biological age, such as reaching the age of 18 or a legal age. Maybe some of you would say being an adult has to do with being self-supporting, such as being able to financially be independent from parents, being able to live independently. Or maybe adulthood can be characterized by having a chosen career, maybe being a teacher, being a psychologist, being a doctor. Or maybe adulthood is marked by having a married life or having your own children, having your own spouse. Or maybe it has something to do with psychological maturity, which is something to do with one's discovering of a coherent sense of self, becoming independent from parents, and developing a system of values and forming relations. Now, all of these characteristics may characterize an adult, but literature would actually suggest that adulthood is not necessarily characterized by external criteria, but it is actually indicated by internal factors such as a sense of autonomy, self-control, and personal responsibility that is much more a state of mind than just these specific discrete events. And so some people may grow older, but they do not necessarily grow as an adult. Now, for most lay people, adulthood is usually characterized by three defining characteristics. So what could be the characteristics of being an adult? The first is an adult accepts responsibility for oneself. Next, an adult is able to make independent decisions whether to get married or not, whether to choose a certain job, and other independent decisions. And lastly, for most people, being an adult has to do something with becoming financially independent. Now, being a young adult doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be financially independent immediately, but it actually allows you a time for the young adult to eventually leave the nest and become fully independent from the family members, especially from the parents. Now let's proceed on the physical development of emerging adults. Let's try to see what are the common health issues that most emerging adults face and what could be other factors that contribute to their physical development. According to this health and fitness survey in the US, So these are the current standing of the physical status of most young adults in the States. So what are the different factors that influences one's health? So first are genetic influences. The mapping of the human genome enables the scientists or enables experts to see which specific genes are responsible for diseases. And so some people tend to be more vulnerable in developing a disease compared to other people. For example, some people may be more prone to acquiring obesity or certain cancers because of specific genes present in their system, and even mental health conditions such as substance use disorders and other psychological disorders. So some individuals may be prone to developing um, a substance use disorder because they have this genetic vulnerability to developing this as compared to other people. While genetic influences can be a factor, behavioral and other environmental influences also play a role in expressing these genetic vulnerabilities. So, some of the behavioral influences that affect health and fitness among emerging adults is one, diet and nutrition. Now, because most of the emerging adults tend to have a very hectic lifestyle, very hectic work schedule, so most of the food that they consume on a daily basis consist of unhealthy food such as fast foods and other instant meals. And this unhealthy diet or unhealthy lifestyle usually leads to a host of different lifestyle diseases such as cardiovascular diseases, stroke, hypertension, diabetes, and other lifestyle diseases. And so it is very crucial for emerging adults to maintain a healthy diet and maintain a well balanced nutrition. Obesity and being overweight is also one of the worldwide worldwide epidemic considered by the World Health Organization. And again, this is linked to an unhealthy lifestyle observed by a lot of young adults. Aside from unhealthy eating habits, other factors that could contribute to obesity or being overweight is number one, having a sedentary lifestyle. Now, since most of young adults have a hectic work schedule, they tend to be immersed with their work and thus may um, engage in just sitting down or other sedimentary activities. And so this could also contribute to the or to obesity or to being overweight among emerging adults. And so physical activity is very crucial to developing a healthier and a more fit body. And so if young adults would engage in physical activities such as exercise, jogging, and other physical activities, it helps maintain a desirable body weight, but it also can build muscles, it can strengthen one's heart and lungs, it could lower blood pressure, and of course, it protects an individual from from most diseases common to um, young adults. Sleep is also important for young adults, not just among children, but sleep continues to play a crucial role in developing a healthy body. Smoking and other substances could also increase the risk of developing other diseases. And the problematic thing with smoking or substance use is they tend to co-occur. So smoking increases the chances of also engaging in alcohol use and illegal drug use, and it could lead to a host of polysubstance use and other risky activities, such as it could also be associated with risky sexual behaviors. Now, while these genetic and behavioral influences directly influence one's health and fitness, there are also indirect influences on the health and fitness among young adults. So, here are three indirect influences. One is the socioeconomic status of individuals. And so researches would suggest that there is a connection between socioeconomic status and health. So higher income people usually have better health as compared to those living in poverty. Um, Now, this doesn't mean that it is the socioeconomic status that directly or causes good health, but it's actually related to environmental and lifestyle factors that tends to be more causative of these diseases or these disorders. So what I'm trying to say is that people living with a higher income or living in a higher socioeconomic status tend to have more education, tends to be more affluent, so they are able to access resources such as healthcare. So that means if they get sick, they can access healthcare immediately. They can send themselves to go to a doctor, to go to a hospital, and they are more likely educated to know which are good for the health and which are not good for the health as compared to those living in lower income households. Race and ethnicity could also indirectly influence one's health and fitness, and also relationships could also take a toll on one's health. So, um, elements in social relationships tend to be vital, such as social integration and social support. Social integration involves an active engagement in a lot of social relationships, activities, and roles, and social integration enhances one's emotional well being, which would also influence one's health and fitness. Another is social support, which has something to do with material, informational, and psychological resources derived from your social network. Now, how this would affect one's health is that it could be a source of coping when an individual is stressed. Moreover, individuals at this developmental stage is also prone to a host of mental health issues. One is substance use and abuse. Now, while substance use fairly begins at an early age, as young as age 11, it could potentially develop into more pathological trajectories and may develop substance use disorders. So this could be one common mental health issues among emerging adults. Antisocial behavior can also be present at this stage, although it tends to decline as compared to antisocial behaviors found during adolescence. Depression and other mental health disorders can also be present during this stage. Next are sexual and reproductive issues. So this is also a time wherein these issues can also be present. So while sexual debut class is considered a developmental milestone um, in one's identity, so it is a developmental milestone among individuals, early sexual debut usually lead to negative and irreversible outcomes. And so a comparison between individuals who had early sexual debut compared to those who had late sexual debut, those individuals who had an earlier sexual activity um, tends to experience a lot of negative outcomes such as teenage pregnancy and contraction of STIs as compared to those who engaged in sexual activities late in young adulthood stage. So one of the negative outcomes during a risky sexual activity, number one, is sexually transmitted diseases, which could be present if one engages in risky sexual behaviors. That's just one. It could also lead to teenage pregnancies, which is also at risk for obstetrical complications and even reproductive cancers. Menstrual disorders could also be present in this stage. So a menstrual disorder called premenstrual syndrome, which is characterized by a physical discomfort, but it also is characterized by an emotional tension, which is which is experienced 2 weeks before menstrual period. Now the DSM-5 actually includes a new depressive disorder called premenstrual dysphoric disorder, which is basically characterized by emotional instability and irritability 2 weeks before the menstrual period. So this can be also present at this stage, and this syndrome is usually confused with dysmenorrhea, which is common among adolescents. And infertility could also be a problem, especially for young adults who want to start a family. Now let's delve into the cognitive development among young adults, who will try to see what could be distinctive qualities of the cognitive ability among young adults. So what's distinctive about adult thought? Now, a lot of researchers and developmental theorists have studied adult cognition from a variety of different views and perspectives. And so some investigators propose that adult thought or adult cognition, it actually operates beyond formal operations, which is proposed by Jean Piaget. So individuals actually go beyond formal operations. So two elements that characterize an adult thought or an adult cognitive ability is number one, reflective thinking, which emphasizes complex logic, and the other one is post formal thought, which involves intuition and emotion as well. For reflective thinking, it involves an active, persistent, and careful consideration of information or beliefs in the light of the evidence and supports them and the conclusions to which they lead. So this basically means that an individual is able to reflect upon new ideas, new information, and try to contest existing complex ideas, beliefs that they already have. And so reflective thinking is a characteristic that goes beyond logical, hypodeductive thinking. However, although reflective thinking is one of the characteristics of, or one distinct characteristic of adult thought, reflective thinking is not observed in every adults or in every young adults. And so reflective thinkers, they continually question supposed facts, draw inferences, and make connections. The next distinctive characteristic of adult cognition is the post-formal thought, which involves intuition and emotional components to it. Now, this type of thinking, it relies on one's subjective understanding or subjective experience on a particular circumstance, and it relies on one's intuitive ability, and it also involves emotion. And this kind of thinking, or this intuitive or emotional kind of thinking, it helps an individual cope with a seemingly chaotic world. So situations which are ambiguous, which are when an individual is uncertain or a relatively new experience. So post-formal thought tends to enable the person to cope with those specific situations. Another view on the adult thought is these 7 stages of age-related cognitive component. So the first stage is the acquisitive stage, which occurs during childhood and adolescence. So this is a stage wherein children and adolescents acquire information and skills mainly for their own sake or to prepare themselves in the role that they will play in a society. The next stage is the achieving stage, which is observed among young adults. So young adults no longer acquire, as compared to children and adolescents, knowledge merely for its own sake, but they actually use and acquire knowledge to pursue goals such as career and family in their lives. The next stage is the responsible stage, which is among middle adults. So, middle aged people use their minds to solve practical problems associated with responsibilities to others, such as family members or employees, which is a characteristic event during middle adulthood. Executive stage is a stage that may overlap with the two previous stages, the achieving and responsible stages, and are responsible for societal systems, the reorganizational, reintegrative, and legacy creating stages are characteristic of individuals in the late adulthood stage. Another perspective on the adult cognitive ability is Sternberg's triarchic theory of intelligence. Now, Sternberg's triarchic theory of intelligence is comprised of three elements. First is the componential element, which has to do something with one's analytical ability. Another is the experiential element, which has something to do with creativity and insight. And third is the contextual element, which has something to do with practicality in the real world. Now, what is different during the adult life or young adult life as compared to earlier stages is that adult life is usually more concerned on how an individual is able to navigate the demanding environment. And so the componential element, which is which has to do something with analytical ability, may not be the only element that is necessary at this stage. Now, during the previous stages, um, analytical ability is important for an individual to be successful and to excel in school related achievements. However, during adulthood, it is more important for an individual, for an adult, to be able to successfully navigate the demanding environment, which is not necessarily related with school related achievements. And so, experiential and contextual elements um, become a particularly important element or particular important elements during adulthood. So, an individual's creative insight and one's practical intelligence may now take a more crucial role as compared to the other element, which has something to do with one's analytical ability. Emotional intelligence may also play a role in one's adult thought, and so emotional intelligence is composed of four related skills. So this is comprised with the skill to perceive, use, understand, and manage, or basically regulate emotions of one's own emotions and be able to understand other people's emotions. So this enables an individual to harness emotions, which is necessary, especially in a demanding environment, to deal more effectively with social environment. And so it enables the person to successfully navigate, successfully um, go around with the work environment, with the societal environment, and other environments that the young adult is involved in. And it requires awareness of the type of behavior that is appropriate in any given social situation. Now let's tackle the psychosocial development among emerging adults. Now, it is good to take note that the paths to adulthood are now far more varied than it was in the past. Now, before, maybe your parents or your grandparents, when they finish school, they tend to leave home and then get a job. And when they're stable, they find a partner, get married, and have children. However, new trends are currently emerging as of the moment. And so, for many young people today, emerging adulthood or this developmental stage is a time of experimentation before actually assuming the adult roles and responsibilities. So, for example, a young person may delay getting married, or even if they decide to get married, may delay to have children, may choose to spend the first 2 years um, having no children, and things like that. And so let's try to see what could be the different development that occurs during this stage. Now, development in emerging adulthood undergoes different processes. So the first process is called recentering. So as the name suggests, the process underlies the shift to an adult identity. So it's actually a shift from an earlier role and assuming an adult identity. So this is the primary task among emerging adults. Now, the recentering process, it involves three stages. So the first stage is characterized when an individual is still embedded in the family of origin. So again, emerging adulthood allows the individual a time or buys an individual a time for him or her to be stable enough, to be prepared enough to take the concrete adult roles. However, even if the person is still embedded in the family of origin, expectations for self-reliance and self-directedness begins to increase. The next stage is when the individual remains connected but no longer embedded within the family of origin. So, temporary exploratory involvements in a variety of college courses, jobs, and intimate partners may characterize this stage. And lastly, the third stage of recentering is marked by independence from the family of origin and commitment to a career, a partner, and possibly children. So, this is the stage wherein an individually slowly um, gains independence and slowly detaches or leaves the nest and become an independent adult. So the person would now enter a new life by being independent and being involved with one's chosen career, maybe family life, and um, other things. Aside from recentering, the stage of emerging adulthood also offers moratorium or a timeout. So it is a timeout from developmental pressures, and it also enables the individual to have freedom to experiment with various roles and lifestyles. So this allows the young adult to experiment and explore because he and or she is now more independent in making decisions for himself or herself. However, it is also a turning point during which one's adult roles or role commitments gradually crystallize. So eventually, the adult roles later on will tend to crystallize during this specific period. So, a measure of how successfully emerging adults handle the developmental task of leaving the childhood home is their ability to maintain close but autonomous relationships with parents. Now, being independent, leaving the house doesn't mean that the individual is psychologically detached from the family or from the parents. They do um, involve being autonomous, being independent, but they should be able to maintain close relationships with their parents. Now let's delve into Eric Erickson's psychosocial stage of intimacy versus isolation. Now, so again, to recall the one of the basic assumptions of Erickson's psychosocial development is that for an individual to successfully pass through a developmental stage, one must be able to develop more of the syntonic element than the dystonic element so as for an individual to develop a basic strength. However, if this doesn't happen, then the individual would most likely develop the core pathology, which would take a toll on the next developmental stage. And so, during this stage, Erickson believed that it was vital for an individual, for a young adult, to develop close, committed relationships with other people. And so, being intimate or being able to establish intimacy, not just to a romantic partner, but also to one's peers, colleagues, and other social relationships, is vital to developing the basic strength, which is love. So, as people enter adulthood, those emotionally intimate relationships play a critical role in a person's emotional well being. And being able to gain the sense of intimacy among the one's family members, one's romantic partner or a spouse, a colleague, and other peers may be prepared to take on the next stage on generativity versus stagnation. And so the basic strength of love is crucial for an individual to have this sense of wanting to take care of younger generation. And so if an individual is not able to establish um, intimate and close relationships, not being able to commit oneself to other people, then the person would most likely would most likely be isolated than being intimate, and would most likely develop the core pathology, which is exclusivity. So being exclusive at this stage would again take a toll on the next stage on middle adulthood. And so again, romantic and sexual relationships can be an important part of this stage, but this is not the only way of establishing intimacy. Intimacy is more about having close and loving relationships. So it includes romantic partners, but it can also encompass close, enduring friendships with people outside of your family. Okay. Now let's talk about the foundations of intimate relationships. So again, um, the emerging adulthood stage is again characterized by forming or being able to build strong foundations in intimate relationships. Now, this doesn't mean that the previous and even the stages after this doesn't need to establish intimate relationships or social relationships in general, but it's actually during this stage wherein intimate relationships prepare the individual to take more adult roles later in the developmental stage. Young adults seek intimacy in relationships with peers and romantic partners, and so self disclosure is an important aspect of intimacy. Most young adults have friends but have increasingly limited time to spend with them, probably because of one's work and very hectic schedule. And women's friendships tend to be more intimate than men's. Another form of relationships that young adults could participate could be in marital lifestyles or non-marital lifestyles. And now more adults than in the past postpone marriage or even never marry. So there's an increasing number of um, young adults who tend to choose to marry later, and even some of them, they choose, even if they get married, they choose not to have children, or some individuals even choose not to marry. And so several reasons could lead to this decision. So some of the reasons of staying outside include career opportunities, travel, sexual and lifestyle freedom, desire for self-fulfillment, women's greater self-sufficiency, reduced social pressure to marry, fear of divorce, difficulty in finding a suitable mate, lack of dating opportunities, or of available mates. So these are some of the reasons why people tend to postpone marriage or even not get married. Young adults also, some young adults also observe gay and lesbian relationships. Some of them, they could also um, form cohabitating relationships, so they don't get married, but they just observe cohabitation. Parenthood is also one of the tasks, among young adults who did decide to get married eventually. So today, women in industrialized societies are having fewer children and having them later in life, which is a current emerging trend among young adults. So it is true. So we see now family members having fewer children, one child or two children, or maybe married couples could choose to delay or postpone having children. So they want to build and to really enjoy themselves first, or maybe build their career first before they have children. Fathers are usually less involved in child raising than mothers, but they are now more involved as compared to previous generations of fathers. Marital satisfaction typically declines during the childbearing years because, again, it is very stressful for both the mother and the father. But later on, you would learn during middle adulthood that marital satisfaction tends to increase when the children in the family are now older. So if the children are older, they start to go to college and leave the house. So marital satisfaction would increase again. Family-friendly workplace policies may help alleviate marital stress because again, it is really stressful, especially for first-time parents. And so these are the some of the psychosocial development that occurs during young adulthood stage. So in summary, the emerging adulthood stage is a period which an individual is able to explore and to seek out different career paths, roles. The individual is now able to make more mature and independent decisions, become more independent financially from parents. And so this is a turning point that actually allows an individual to prepare himself or herself in a more crystallized adult role. Hopefully you learn from this lecture video, and thank you for listening.